The wind howled across the jagged mesas like it carried secrets of 1,000 years. Dust swirled in the fading sun, painting the horizon gold and red. In the distance, a lone figure rode slowly along a narrow ridge, his horse moving with the steady patience of someone who had spent his life in the open plains. His name was Tokoda, and every line of his face told a story of survival, of battles fought under the scorching sun and the freezing nights of the desert. He was a man of few words, but his eyes held a fire that could ignite storms. Tokoda was no ordinary man, no settler hiding behind fences or trading posts. He was Apache, a son of the land, born under the vast skies that stretched farther than most hearts could ever imagine, carried the weight of his people's history, the memory of lost villages and stolen lives. Yet he also carried a quiet honor that few outsiders could ever understand. The townsfolk whispered about him when he passed through their dusty streets, some calling him fierce, others saying he was dangerous. But to Tokoda, words held no power, actions did. That morning, the town of Red Rock had never seemed smaller or stranger. Its wooden buildings leaned slightly under the sun, their paint peeling like old scars. The air smelled of iron from the blacksmith's forge, of leather from saddles and boots, and of fear that clung to everyone who dared glance at Tokoda. He dismounted at the edge of the square, letting his horse graze while he surveyed the place. His gaze settled on a woman standing alone near the well. Her clothes were rough, patched in places where the fabric had worn thin. Her hair fell in untamed waves over her shoulders, dark as the night that had swallowed the desert the day before. She looked different, in a way that made whispers rise immediately from the few townsfolk daring to peek at her from behind shutters. Her name was Ayana, and she was called ugly by those who had never bothered to look past the surface. But Tokoda did not care for the chatter of shallow mouths. He saw in her something raw, untamed, and unbroken, the kind of strength that had survived storms of scorn and life that refused to bow. Ayana's eyes held a fire of their own, though the world around her had tried to snuff it out. There was a loneliness in her stance, a guarded distance that spoke of a life learned hard, yet a dignity that made her impossible to dismiss. The moment their eyes met, the town seemed to hold its breath. Tokoda felt a pull he could not explain, an ancient whisper that told him she was different from anyone he had ever met. People moved aside instinctively, feeling the tension between them, sensing a story that would not follow the easy path of expectation. In Red Rock, appearances ruled everything, and a man like Tokoda, a woman like Ayana, standing together in a world that had written its rules centuries ago, it was already dangerous. Ayana did not smile. She did not look away either. She simply studied him with a patience that mirrored his own. So she had waited her whole life for a gaze that recognized more than what could be seen. For years, she had learned to armor herself against ridicule, against men who had only sought her for pity or for convenience. But there was something different in Tokoda's looks, something that did not flinch, something that understood the loneliness behind her eyes. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of boots on wooden planks. A group of men from the town, armed with suspicion and old grudges, approached. They had noticed Tokoda's presence, and worse, they had noticed Ayana. Their whispers were loud enough to reach the edge of the square, questioning, judging, deciding her worth before she had a chance to speak. Tokoda's hand brushed the hilt of his knife, not in threat, but in readiness, the kind that said he would defend what he had chosen without hesitation. Ayana, for her part, did not flinch at the murmurs. She had learned long ago that the world often mistook her for fragile or foolish, yet she carried a strength few dared to see. Today it seemed she would finally be seen, and the sight was unsettling, not only for her, but for everyone around. There was something wild in this meeting, something that could not be tamed by law or tradition. It was a story that refused the easy path, that would break the rules of Red Rock, and of every town that thought it could dictate love or choice. Tokoda moved closer to her, his boots stirring small clouds of dust. He said nothing, yet the silence between them spoke volumes. In his eyes, there was a promise, a recognition of her courage, her scars, her unmatched will. The men watching from the shadows shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene, unsure if they even had the right. This was a story they could not understand, a story that did not follow the rules of appearances, of wealth, or of tradition. Ayana's lips parted slightly as she finally spoke, her voice steady but low. "You do not belong here," she said, though her tone was not accusatory. It was the simple observation of a woman who had learned to read the world with precision. Dakota nodded, acknowledging the truth. He did not belong, not in Red Rock, not in their limited understanding of life, but he had arrived, and he had arrived for her. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the town. It painted their figures in gold and blood-red light, as if the desert itself bore witness to what was unfolding. People in the streets began to retreat, sensing that this meeting was not just an encounter, but a turning point. The rules of their small town were fragile against the pull of something greater, something neither of them fully understood yet already recognized in each other. And then, just as the last rays of sun disappeared behind the cliffs, a distant sound broke the tenchuna whistle, sharp and commanding, coming from the direction of the canyon. Dakota's eyes narrowed, and Ayana's body tensed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Something was coming, something that neither of them could ignore. A story that had begun quietly, almost unnoticed, was about to explode into the kind of danger that would test courage, loyalty, and love itself. Dakota reached out a hand, not for comfort, not for possession, but for acknowledgement. Ayana hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The moment was simple, yet electric, as if the land itself recognized their connection. The townsfolk who remained watched in silent awe, whispering rumors they would carry for years. How could a man like Dakota choose a woman like Ayana? They did not understand, and perhaps they never would. The rules they had lived by were crumbling, and this union was proof that love did not heed appearances or expectation. But before they could speak, before they could even fully grasp the strange bond forming between them, the whistle came again, closer, louder. Shadows lengthened in ways that spoke of danger, of pursuit, of forces outside the town that would challenge everything they had begun to discover in each other. Dakota's jaw tightened. Ayana's grip on his hand went firmer. Neither of them knew exactly what was coming, only that it would demand everything from them. And just like that, the sun vanished completely, leaving the desert and the town in a cool blue twilight. The story of Dakota and Ayana was only beginning. The question that haunted every whisper in Red Rock remained unanswered. Why had the Apache man chosen the woman everyone called ugly? What secret strength did she hold that even the fiercest man of the plains recognized? And what storms were heading their way? Storms that could either bind them together or tear them apart forever. The wind carried the echo of the whistle down the canyon, over the mesas, and into the hearts of two souls who had found each other against all odds. And in that echo, the promise of a wild, untamed love burned brighter than any sunset, daring the world to challenge it. The wind carried the whistle further into the canyon, twisting between jagged rocks and tossing loose gravel like tiny warnings. Dakota tightened his grip on Ayana's hand, feeling the tension in her body, the pulse of her fear mingling with the strength she tried so hard to hide. He did not speak, because words would have been useless. The sound itself was a signal, an unspoken message that danger was not coming from the town, but from the wide, untamed wilderness that surrounded Red Rock. Ayana's eyes scanned the horizon. She had lived on the edge of danger her entire life, learning to read signs that others missed. There was a presence out there, moving with purpose, something large and deliberate. Her instincts told her it was not a band of lawless settlers or wandering outlaws. It was something older, something that had followed Dakota's kind for generations. She felt the prickling of a history that had been buried in the desert sand. A story of stolen land, of bloodshed, of warriors and hunters who understood the language of the earth better than any man in Red Rock. "You feel it too," she whispered, barely audible over the rising wind. Dakota's eyes darkened. He nodded once, a single motion heavy with meaning. He had felt it ever since he arrived in Red Rock, though he had not known what it was. It was the pull of the canyon, the call of the land, the knowledge that his presence in hers was not unnoticed. Some things in the plains never slept. Some things watched, waited, and tested those brave or foolish enough to walk between them. The town behind them seemed smaller now, insignificant against the wide stretch of desert and stone. Red Rock's rules, its gossip, its judgment, they did not matter here. What mattered was survival, understanding, and trust between two people who had nothing but each other to rely on. Ayana had spent her life learning that trust was fragile, broken easily by betrayal or neglect. Yet something in Dakota told her he would not break. That thought gave her courage, even as the wind carried the approaching threat closer. Long ago, before Red Rock and its wooden buildings had risen from the dust, Dakota's people had roamed freely across this land. Generations of Apache had hunted, defended, and revered it. Dakota remembered the stories his father had told him under the endless sky, stories of warriors who could hear the heartbeat of the earth, who could track shadows where others only saw sunlight. His own training had been harsh, unrelenting, but it had taught him more than survival. It had taught him to see the truth in people beyond appearances. That truth now lay in Ayanna, the woman they called ugly, whose scars and rough edges were nothing compared to the fire she carried inside. Ayanna, for her part, had a past as tangled as the canyons themselves. She had been born far from Red Rock, in a settlement that valued beauty above all else, where her natural face and untamed hair had made her an outcast from the start. She had been abandoned, ignored, mocked, yet she had survived through wit, cunning, and sheer determination. Her survival skills were unmatched, honed by years of living with little but herself. Every day had been a lesson in endurance, every insult a chance to grow stronger. Yet she had never met someone like Dakota, someone whose respect was earned not from compliance or charm, but from raw courage and integrity. The wind shifted again, and the whistle echoed louder. Dakota raised his head slightly, listening. It was closer now, and the sound carried more than just warning, it carried intent. Someone or something was coming. His instincts sharpened. He could feel the earth tremble slightly beneath his boots, a faint vibration that only those who had walked the plains all their lives could notice. This was not random. It was deliberate. "Why here?" Ayanna asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of years spent questioning why the world had always seemed against her. "Why now?" Dakota did not answer immediately. He studied the horizon, measuring distance, evaluating the shape of shadows that stretched like fingers across the cliffs. "The land remembers," he finally said, his voice low and calm. "It remembers who belongs, who survives, and who breaks the rules. We are only beginning to understand what that means." Ayanna's brow furrowed. She did not fully understand, but she trusted him enough to know that whatever danger approached was real and unavoidable. Their hands remained clasped, a silent agreement to face it together, no matter what lay ahead. From the edge of the canyon, a figure appeared. At first it was nothing more than a shadow, a dark silhouette against the glowing sky. As it moved closer, the features became clearer. A tall, broad man with the hard edges of a hunter etched into his face, his dark eyes sharp with purpose. He was mounted on a horse as black as midnight, and the animal's hooves barely made a sound on the rocky terrain. Dakota recognized him immediately. It was Nakai, a rival warrior from a neighboring band, known for his cunning and ruthless skill in tracking anyone who crossed his path. Nakai's arrival was no coincidence. He had followed Dakota for days, watching from the cliffs and valleys, waiting for the moment when the Apache man would show weakness. And now he had found a tour, at least thought he had. His reputation in the plains was fearsome, his intentions always calculated, yet even Nakai did not know. The bond that had formed here, the unspoken connection between Dakota and Ayanna, that bond was invisible. Yet it radiated strength, and it unnerved even the most seasoned tracker. Ayanna felt the tension immediately, sensing the danger before it fully revealed itself. Her hand tightened on Dakota's, and her heart raced. But there was no fear in her gaze, only the fire of someone who had survived worse and would not back down now. She understood instinctively that this encounter was a test, a challenge to both of them, and that the outcome could define everything about the lives they were beginning to build. The wind carried another sound, the faint clatter of hooves, smaller, swifter, coming from the opposite ridge. Dakota's eyes flicked to the movement, calculating possibilities. This was not just Nakai. Someone else was here, someone unknown, adding another layer of uncertainty. The desert, it seemed, was alive with watchers, each movement a thread in a web that neither of them could fully see. Ayanna swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to panic. She had faced bandits, wild animals, and the relentless judgment of townsfolk, yet this felt different. This felt like history itself was pressing down on them, demanding that they prove their worth, their courage, their connection. She glanced at Dakota, and in his expression, She saw the same realization mirrored back at her. Whatever was coming, they could not run. They could only face it together. The sun had vanished completely, leaving the canyon bathed in twilight shadows that deepened with every passing second. The wind howled like an ancient song, carrying scents of sagebrush, dust, and iron from old battlefields long forgotten. Dakota and Ayanna moved closer to the edge of a rocky outcrop, seeking higher ground. From this vantage, they could see the movements of Nakai and the unknown rider, tracking the patterns of their approach, searching for an advantage. Tokota's mind raced, planning silently, weighing every possible outcome. He had faced death before, countless times, but this was different. This was not just survival. It was a test of loyalty, of connection, of the strange bond forming between him and the woman called Ugly. The stakes were higher, and failure was not an option. Ayanna, too, was calculating. Her survival instincts were sharp, trained over years of rejection and isolation. She could anticipate danger, but she could not predict the weight of the history embedded in Takeda's presence. The layers of blood, honor, and pride that followed him across the plains. Yet she was ready to learn, ready to fight, ready to face whatever challenge the desert had in store. As the shadows deepened, the two of them stood side by side, the silence stretching between them, heavy with anticipation. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first move, the first word, the first spark of conflict. In that silence, the story of Dakota and Ayanna continued to unfold, a story of love defying judgment, of courage testing limits, of two souls finding each other in a world that had long sought to separate them. The first shot rang out from the far ridge, sharp and echoing against the canyon walls. Dakota's hand went instinctively to his knife, but he did not move forward. Ayanna mirrored him, her gaze fixed on the sound. It was only the beginning, the opening of a chapter that would test every rule, every expectation, and every heartbeat they had between them. And as the wind carried the echo of that first warning through the desert, it whispered a truth neither of them could ignore. The path ahead would be treacherous, choices impossible, and the bond they had found would be tested in ways the world had never allowed. But for the first time in their lives, they did not walk that path alone. The first shot had barely faded when another came. This one closer, more deliberate, and it forced Dakota and Ayanna to shift behind the jagged rocks of the outcrop. Dust and small stones flew into the air with each impact, and the echo rattled against the canyon walls like a drumbeat of warning. Dakota's eyes narrowed as he scanned the ridges, reading the movements of Nakai and the unknown rider. Both had approached from opposite directions, creating a trap that could close in seconds. "Two against us," Ayanna muttered, her voice low but steady. She crouched beside him, one hand gripping the edge of the rock, the other brushing against the leather pouch at her waist, a pouch filled with small, sharp tools she had crafted herself over the years. Every tool had a purpose, every motion was precise. She had survived on wit, and now that wit was the only advantage they had against two skilled trackers who would not hesitate to strike. Dakota's hand rested on his knife, but he did not move forward yet. "They are testing us," he said. "Nakai wants more than a fight. He wants to see if we can be broken." His words were calm, but the undercurrent of warning ran like lightning through the air. He'd faced Nakai before, in skirmishes where the stakes were life and honor. Nakai was cunning, relentless, and entirely predictable in the ways that made him most dangerous. Yet Dakota also knew that the unknown rider was less predictable. Whoever had followed from the other ridge was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and that added a dangerous uncertainty to the mix. Ayanna's dark eyes followed his gaze, noting the subtle shifts in the ridges, the glint of sun on metal, the movement of rocks that could hide both man and horse. "We can't just wait," she said. "We need to force them into making the first mistake." Her voice carried authority that Dakota recognized immediately. She was not just surviving, she was thinking, planning, anticipating the flow of danger. That was why he had chosen her. That was why the world, with all its shallow judgments, could never understand her value. From Nakai's perspective, he believed he had the advantage. He had studied Dakota for days, watching from the canyon cliffs, learning his habits, his patterns, the way he measured the world before acting. Nakai's reputation among the neighboring bands was one of fear and control. Every move he made now was meant to assert dominance, to remind Dakota that even a warrior as skilled as he could be, outmaneuvered. But Nakai did not account for Ayana, did not see the fire in her, the kind of raw courage that refused to be ignored. To him, she was a distraction, an obstacle, but Takeda's connection to her made that impossible to exploit fully. The unknown rider on the opposite ridge had a different perspective entirely. Clad in a weathered duster and a wide-brimmed hat, he observed silently, his intentions unreadable. His eyes followed every movement, calculating distances, assessing reactions, predicting mistakes. He was a loner, a wanderer of the desert who had survived by staying unseen and striking unexpectedly. To him, Tokoda and Ayana were not enemies yet, but they represented an opportunity, a chance to measure skill and resolve, to see if the pair could withstand what the land itself seemed ready to demand. As the wind shifted, carrying scents of dust, sagebrush, and sweat, Tokoda whispered to Ayana, "They will move soon. We need a plan." She nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. The rocks beneath them were both shield and trap. One wrong move could leave them exposed. Every instinct honed from years of survival was screaming in harmony, telling her that the coming minutes could change everything. Meanwhile, back in Red Rock, the town was stirring with rumors. The blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man named Harkin, watched from a shadowed window as Takoda and Ayana disappeared into the canyon. He had seen them together, recognized the tension, and felt the unease of something larger at play. Harkin had once traded with Takeda's people, had known stories of honor and ferocity that few in the town remembered. Now he worried that history was returning in a form none of them were prepared to face. The sheriff, a lean man named Jarek, dismissed the warnings as exaggeration, but even he could not ignore the distant echoes that reached the edge of town. Back in the canyon, the first true movement came. Nakai signaled to the unknown rider with a subtle gesture, and both men shifted strategically, their horses moving with precision. They intended to encircle Takoda and Ayana to force them out from the rocks and into a vulnerable position. But Takoda had anticipated this, and his countermeasures were subtle, yet effective. He used the uneven terrain to create false impressions of his location, shifting shadows and tossing dust to confuse their line of sight. Ayana, too, contributed. She rolled small stones down the slope, creating sounds that suggested movement where there was none, leading Nakai's horse into hesitation. Her mind worked like a battlefield map, analyzing angles, predicting reactions, creating opportunities where brute strength alone would fail. Takoda noticed every action, every calculated risk, and silently acknowledged that she was not just a companion, she was a partner in survival, in strategy, in the unspoken rules of the Wild West that recognized only skill and courage. Hours seemed to pass in the span of minutes. The sun had fully set now, leaving the canyon in a pale silver twilight. Tokoda and Ayana moved cautiously, each step deliberate, each gesture a signal of understanding between them. They were aware of the dual threat, the predictable cunning of Nakai, and the unpredictable presence of the unknown rider. Every motion they made carried risk, but in that risk lay the only chance to survive and maintain control over their destiny. Ayana's mind drifted briefly to the town she had left behind, to the whispers that had followed her all her life. How had the world taught her that beauty was worth more than courage, that approval mattered more than survival? And yet here in the canyon, with Tokoda by her side, those lessons felt meaningless. The judgments of shallow minds could not reach them here. What mattered was skill, intuition, and the bond forming between two people who had refused to follow the rules of the world. Tokoda sensed her thoughts, the unspoken doubts and fears. He tightened his grip on her hand, not in warning, but in reassurance. "Focus," he said, his voice barely audible over the whispering wind. "They are dangerous, but we are ready." Ayana nodded. She understood that readiness was not just about weapons or terrain. It was about mind, heart, and connection. She could feel Takeda's focus, his unshakable determination, and it gave her strength. She had never trusted anyone like this, never relied on another person completely. Yet here in the shadow of the canyon, facing two of the most dangerous hunters in the region, she found herself willing to risk everything on that trust. The first direct clash came when Nakai's horse lunged, narrowly missing a rock as Tokoda sidestepped, his knife flashing briefly in the moonlight. The unknown rider took a different approach, circling wide, attempting to flank them from the rear. Ayana's quick thinking threw another set of stones down the slope, creating the illusion of movement that delayed the flank. The tension rose with every heartbeat, every breath, every shadow that moved with intent. From the ridges above, both attackers saw the unpredictability of the pair and felt unease. Nakai gritted his teeth. He had not expected such coordination, such intuition, such connection. The unknown rider, silent and calculating, adjusted his strategy, realizing that what he faced was not just skill, but synergy between two people whose bond gave them strength beyond the sum of their parts. And yet the danger was far from over. Neither Dakota nor Ayana could let down their guard. The canyon itself seemed to conspire, hiding surprises in its folds, offering paths of escape that could just as easily lead to traps. Every second stretched the tension, every movement held the weight of survival. And every glance exchanged between them reinforced the truth that they could trust no one but each other. As the night deepened, the battle of wits continued. The echoes of hooves, the faint clatter of rocks, and the whisper of the wind created a symphony of suspense. The story of Dakota and Ayana, of Nakai and the unknown rider, unfolded in a world that recognized only courage and instinct. Each moment built upon the last, every choice critical. And every heartbeat carried the possibility of change, of triumph, or of defeat. Neither side could predict what the next hour would bring. The canyon had become a chessboard, and every step was a piece in a game with stakes higher than life itself. Nakai's pride demanded victory. The unknown rider's curiosity demanded observation. Tokata and Ayana's bond demanded survival. And the desert, vast and merciless, watched silently, ready to test every rule, every instinct, and every heartbeat that dared challenge its power. The canyon was alive with shadows, and the wind carried whispers that seemed almost human, twisting around rocks and cliffs as if the land itself was watching, judging, waiting. Dakota and Ayana crouched behind a jagged boulder, their breaths steady but tense, their bodies coiled like springs ready to release. The night had deepened into a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the world, leaving only the faint silver light of the moon and the glimmer of distant stars. Every movement, every sound, could mean the difference between survival and defeat. From above, Nakai's silhouette shifted against the ridge, the moonlight glinting off the edge of his knife. He moved with the precision of a hunter who had spent a lifetime tracking prey, each step measured, each pause calculated. His eyes, dark and cold, scanned the canyon floor, searching for Dakota. The Apache man had eluded him for hours, anticipating every move, creating illusions and traps that made Nakai question his own skill. Yet he would not admit defeat. He had pride, reputation, and a deep-seated grudge to satisfy. The unknown rider on the opposite ridge was no less dangerous. Silent and deliberate, he circled with patience that bordered on cruelty, his horse stepping lightly over rocks as if it too understood the tension in the air. He had no personal grudge against Dakota or Ayana, but the desert had taught him to respect skill and cunning. They were testing him as much as he was testing them, and he found the challenge intoxicating. He remained unseen, almost ghost-like, waiting for the precise moment when intervention could tip the scales. Tokata turned his gaze to Ayana, studying her face in the faint moonlight. Her eyes reflected courage, determination, and something deeper, an unspoken promise that she would not falter, even when the world demanded it. "We need to move," he whispered, his voice low but urgent. "If we stay in one place too long, they will corner us." Ayana nodded. Her fingers brushed against the leather pouch at her waist, feeling the tools she had spent years perfecting. They were simple items, yet deadly in the hands of someone who understood the terrain, the timing, and the mind of an opponent. "Lead the way," she said. "I trust you." Trust was not something Ayana gave lightly. She had spent a lifetime surviving on her own, learning that even the strongest allies could turn to weakness. Yet here with Dakota, trust was instinctive, a connection that did not require explanation. It was part of what made them stronger than Nakai or the unknown rider could anticipate. The two moved silently along a narrow ledge, the cliff edge dropping sharply below. Every step was measured, every sound suppressed, but even the desert seemed aware of their presence. The distant hooves of Nakai and the unknown rider echoed intermittently, shifting, probing, testing. It was a dangerous dance, one that required total focus and flawless coordination. From Nakai's perspective, the frustration was mounting. Takoda's maneuvers were unpredictable, his understanding of the terrain almost supernatural. Every trap Nakai set seemed to be anticipated, every flanking move countered before it could land. And then there was Ayana, whose sharp mind and quick reflexes complicated every calculation. Nakai had expected a distraction, but she was anything but. Together, the two of them were more than the sum of their parts, and that reality gnawed at him, stirring a primal anger that demanded resolution. The unknown rider remained a shadowy presence, circling ever closer, unseen but felt. He had watched skill and courage clash for hours, waiting for the moment when one misstep could be exploited. The suspense was a thrill, but also a test. Takoda and Ayana were resilient, but even the strongest had limits. Every heartbeat brought them closer to that edge. Ayana's mind wandered briefly to the life she had left behind, the townsfolk who had whispered behind her back, the judgment she had endured, and the countless nights spent alone under an uncaring sky. She had always wondered why life seemed determined to test her at every turn. Now, in the canyon, under the vast expanse of the desert, she realized the answer was not cruelty, it was preparation. Every trial had sharpened her mind, strengthened her resolve, and made her ready for this exact moment. She glanced at Takoda, whose presence was a reminder that survival was never only about skill, it was about trust, connection, and courage. The canyon seemed to close in as Nakai and the unknown rider coordinated, each sending subtle signals, shifting, circling, creating a tightening net that could trap them in seconds. Takoda's eyes flicked to the ridge, calculating angles, timing, distances. He whispered instructions to Ayana, each word precise, deliberate, a map of movement and survival. Ayana followed without hesitation. Her reflexes were lightning fast, her mind constantly predicting outcomes and adjusting instantly. They moved like a single organism, each action reinforcing the other, each decision deliberate, precise, and deadly in its simplicity. Even the canyon seemed to hesitate, as if acknowledging their skill. But the danger was growing. Nakai's patience was wearing thin, his anger sharpening his movements. The unknown rider began to close the distance, no longer just observing, but preparing to strike at the precise moment that would cause the most disruption. The canyon's shadows deepened, hiding unseen threats and amplifying the tension, creating a sense of imminent danger that pressed on Takoda and Ayana from every side. Takoda felt a moment of clarity. This confrontation was about more than survival. It was about proving something to themselves, to each other, and to the world that had always judged them by shallow standards. He saw in Ayana a strength few could recognize, a courage that could match his own, and a wisdom born from hardship. He knew that if they survived this night, nothing could break the bond forming between them. Ayana felt the same. The fear was real, sharp, and unrelenting. But it did not control her. It sharpened her focus, honed her instincts, and made her feel alive in a way she had never known. She understood the gravity of what was coming. They were about to face the most intense moments of their lives, and every skill, every ounce of courage, every instinct would be tested to the limit. From Nakai's ridge, the tension was visible in every movement. He could see Takoda and Ayana's coordination, recognized their trust and skill, and it made him reckless with desire for victory. Every calculation was precise, but pride had a way of blinding even the most skilled hunter. The unknown rider had chosen a different approach. He circled wider, aiming to create confusion, ready to strike at the moment of hesitation. His patience was immense, but even he sensed that the final confrontation was approaching. The canyon, silent but alive, seemed to anticipate the collision of these forces, waiting for the moment when strategy, skill, and courage would meet. Takoda and Ayana finally reached a narrow pass, a place where the canyon walls closed in and movement was restricted. It was both a trap and an opportunity. The geography forced Nakai and the unknown rider to approach more directly, creating a moment where skill and intuition could determine the outcome. Takoda's voice was calm but urgent. "Here," he said. "This is where we control the fight." Ayana's eyes were fierce. She adjusted her stance, her tools ready, her mind mapping every possible threat. "We do this together," she said. Their hands brushed briefly, a silent affirmation of trust and connection. From the ridges above, the two opponents recognized the change. Nakai's eyes narrowed in frustration, and the unknown rider's patience grew taut. Both realized that the final phase was approaching, that the narrow pass would determine control, and that the confrontation was inevitable. The tension in the canyon was almost unbearable, the air thick with anticipation, each heartbeat echoing in the silence between the threats. Dakota and Ayanna moved forward slowly, deliberately, every step calculated, every motion a statement of presence and intent. Nakai and the unknown rider mirrored them, circling, probing, preparing. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, the wind stilled, the shadows thickened. The night was alive with suspense, the kind that made every nerve electric, every glance loaded with potential. The first clash was near, the moment of testing imminent. Nakai's knife flashed in the moonlight. The unknown rider's horse shifted with silent intent. And Tokode and Ayanna readied themselves for the moment when instinct, trust, and courage would collide with danger and skill. Every sense was heightened, every muscle taut. The canyon had become a crucible, a place where survival, trust, and love would be tested to the breaking point. In that frozen moment, with shadows stretching like fingers and the wind carrying the silent threat, Dakota and Ayanna exchanged a glance that said more than words could express. They were ready. The culmination of every trial, every challenge, every whispered warning was about to arrive. And the canyon waited, silent and infinite, for the story to erupt into its next chapter. This section builds maximum suspense, explores multiple angles, the perspectives of Tokuda, Ayanna, Nakai, the unknown rider, and even the canyon itself, and leads the story toward the climax without resolving the conflict. Key words like Apache man, ugly woman, Wild West, love story, danger, trust, canyon, and survival are naturally included. The canyon held its breath as the first clash erupted. Nakai lunged forward, his knife glinting in the pale moonlight. Toka met him with a calm precision that only years of training and instinct could create. He deflected the strike, moving like water over stone, guiding Nakai past him without falter. Ayanna moved as one with him, her own tools ready, striking not with anger but with intelligence, using the rocks and shadows to her advantage. Every movement was a testament to their trust, their connection, and their unspoken understanding of one another. The unknown rider circled closer, but hesitation slowed him. He could see the bond between Dakota and Ayanna, recognize it as a force more powerful than skill alone. He struck once, quickly, trying to test their reflexes, but they were already prepared. Takoda's instincts and Ayanna's foresight allowed them to counter every move, every feint, every attempt to separate them. Nakai's pride flared, but with each failed attack, his frustration grew. The canyon seemed to side with the pair, the terrain offering them protection, giving them space to breathe and calculate. Ayanna's heart pounded, but it was a rhythm of strength, not fear. She glanced at Tokoda as he moved with effortless control, deflecting blows, positioning them strategically. He did not speak. He did not need to. Every gesture was instruction, every glance a message. She followed, instinct guiding her, her mind fully present, her courage undeniable. They were a team forged in adversity, and the canyon had become their proving ground. Nakai made one final, desperate push, moving with reckless force. But Dakota anticipated it, sidestepping and redirecting Nakai's momentum. Ayanna seized the moment, disarming him with a swift movement that left him off balance. The canyon echoed with the sound of his fall, a harsh reminder of the futility of pride when faced with skill and unity. Nakai scrambled to his feet, rage burning in his eyes, but even he could no longer ignore the undeniable truth he had underestimated them. The unknown rider watched, calculating. He realized that interference would be pointless. The outcome was becoming clear. Takoda and Ayanna's coordination, their bond, their mutual respect, gave them a strength that no single opponent could match. With a final measured glance, he retreated, melting into the shadows of the canyon with a silent acknowledgement. He would live to ride another day, but he had witnessed something rare to souls whose connection defied expectation, whose courage could withstand even the most relentless threat. Dakota lowered his knife, breathing deeply but steadily. He turned to Ayanna, whose chest rose and fell with the same rhythm. Her dark eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The danger had not disappeared entirely, but the immediate threat was gone. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust, a quiet acknowledgement of their survival, of their triumph through skill and unity rather than force alone. Ayana laughed softly, a sound that carried relief, disbelief, and joy all at once. "We made it," she said, though the words barely captured the intensity of the moment. Oh, she felt the surge of adrenaline fading, replaced by the warmth of shared victory. Takada's hand brushed against hers, not as instruction, but as affirmation. Together, they had faced the impossible and emerged intact. As dawn approached, the canyon slowly revealed itself in the soft light of early morning. Shadows receded, and the desert stretched vast and golden before them. The cliffs, once ominous and foreboding, now seemed like silent witnesses to what had transpired. A story of survival, courage, and a connection that had defied every expectation. Dakota and Ayana stood side by side, surveying the land that had tested them, recognizing in its vastness the freedom it offered and the life they could claim together. The townsfolk of Red Rock would later speak of the night in whispers, of the woman called ugly and the Apache man who chose her. They would tell stories of courage that went beyond appearance, of respect that could not be bought, of love that defied shallow rules. Ayana's scars and strength, once dismissed, were now seen as proof of her resilience. Dakota's quiet resolve and honor became legendary, not because of victories over others, but because he had recognized something in another that others could not. In the quiet of the canyon, Dakota finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of both reflection and hope. "We survived because we trusted each other," he said. "Because we saw more than what the world allowed us to see." Ayana nodded, her fingers brushing his. She understood the truth in his words. Their bond had been forged in the fires of adversity, and it would endure because it was real, honest, and unyielding. The subplots of their pasts, once heavy and burdening, now felt lighter. Nakai, defeated but alive, would remember the lesson that skill and courage combined were greater than pride and recklessness. The unknown rider, who had observed in silence, would carry the memory of their unity and strength across the desert, a story that would grow in legend. In the town of Red Rock, which had once judged based on appearances, would be reminded that true worth was measured by courage, integrity, and heart. Ayana took a deep breath, letting the wind wash over her. "I never thought the world could see me like this," she admitted softly. "Not for who I am, but for what I can do. For who I can be." Takeda's hand covered hers, a simple gesture that carried more meaning than words ever could. "They never had to," he said, "because we know." The canyon, now bathed in the warm glow of sunrise, seemed to echo the sentiment. Its cliffs, once threatening, now framed a horizon filled with possibility. The air smelled of dust, earth, and new beginnings. Dakota and Ayana had faced danger, defied expectation, and emerged stronger, their connection tested and unbroken. The story of the Apache man and the woman once called ugly was no longer one of mystery or judgment. It was a story of love, courage, and triumph. As they walked back toward Red Rock, side by side, the town began to stir awake. The people who had doubted, judged, and whispered would soon see that courage, skill, and heart could rewrite every expectation. Dakota and Ayana moved as equals, their steps steady, their eyes forward, carrying the unspoken promise of partnership, respect, and shared strength. The lessons of the canyon lingered in their minds. Trust was not given lightly, was earned through courage and understanding. True strength was not measured by appearance or tradition, but by the resilience to face impossible odds and the wisdom to see beyond the surface. Love, they realized, did not follow rules set by others. It thrived in recognition of character, courage, and the willingness to face the world together. Red Rock would remember this night not for the fear it carried, but for the transformation it inspired. Ayana, once dismissed, now held a place of respect and admiration. Takada, the Apache man who had chosen her, became a symbol not of conquest, but of vision, honor, and recognition of true worth. Dada. And together they had shown that even in the harshest desert, even in a world ruled by expectation, courage and love could forge a path toward hope, happiness, and freedom. As they reached the outskirts of the town, Takada and Ayana paused, looking back toward the canyon that had tested them. The wind whispered through the rocks one final time, a quiet acknowledgement of their journey, their survival, and the bond that had carried them through. No words were necessary. The story was written in their eyes, in their hands, in the rhythm of their hearts. Ayana smiled, not at the town, not at Nakai or the unknown rider, but at Dakota. "We did it," she said. Dakota returned the smile, a rare, quiet curve of satisfaction. "Yes," he replied, "and this is only the beginning." The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast canvas of possibility, freedom, and promise. They walked into the light of the rising sun, leaving behind fear, judgment, and expectation, and stepping into a future forged by trust, courage, and the kind of love that defies rules. The canyon remained behind them, silent, yet forever a witness to the night when two souls met, tested the world, and emerged stronger than ever. The legend of Tukada and Ayana would grow, whispered along the ridges and mesas, carried by wind and time, would remind those who listened that courage mattered more than appearance. That love was born from understanding and respect, and that true connection could overcome even the harshest desert storms. And in that story, the woman once called ugly found her place beside a man whose honor matched her own, proving that the world, for all its judgment, could not contain the power of courage, skill, and love. Together, they had broken every rule, survived every test, and emerged not just alive, but victorious in heart and spirit.